Last week we finished the discussion on monetary policy, money and monetary policy. I think the entire discussion related to money we have already completed, and we also agreed that we will do some exercise today, and you promised that you will look at the past paper questions and we'll discuss those answers if you have done, or attempted to answer those questions. Uh, if I remember correctly, I asked you to look at uh, question 2015 September, and another one I think 2017. Were you able to answer at least a couple of these questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think, yes, I see some positive response. Some of you have already done at least part of that. That would be great. Shall we look at the answers? Okay, great. Most of you, I think, many of you are responding positively. That's a good sign. Very good. Let's look at these questions. Okay. Uh, now I can't see your chat, so if you can speak, I think that would be helpful because I have put up full screen mode. Now, this one from the 2015 paper, September, we are given monetary numbers or economic numbers extracted from the central bank annual report. And we have to answer certain questions based on the information given here. Now, the first one, calculate base money, or what we called as reserve money, and broad money supply in 2014. Actually, when we move down the questions, we have to compile both these aggregates for both years. But we'll start with the first one for 2014. Okay, what is the base money amount or reserve money amount for 2014? Does anyone want to unmute and give the answer?
490.
490. Okay. What did you consider in compiling reserve money there? Any other answer?
Currency held public
Okay.
and the deposits held by commercial banks with the central bank.
Okay.
Uh,
What else? I think you are in right direction, but did you look at these components very carefully? Currency held by public, and we are given some other information as well. And you have said deposit held by commercial banks with the central bank. Now, can you remember how do you define reserve money? I'll try to use my pen. So, reserve money or base money, how do you define? What do you have there? This is actually the fresh money or new money issued by the central bank. Money injected by the central bank to the economy. So, what do we have there? We have two major components, currency in circulation. The other one is deposits held by commercial banks with the central bank. You can call them as reserves. Okay. So somebody told me, I'm not so sure who has answered, but somebody told me, okay, you take currency. Now, if you take currency, we are given two types of currency components here: currency held by public, currency held by commercial bank. Which component we should take here for reserve money?
Both.
Actually, we have to take both, isn't it? Why? Now, currency held by public is only one component. Currency held by commercial bank, that is money having in the central commercial bank vaults in their till cash. We call them till cash. So you have to take both. Both we call them as currency in circulation. Plus, what else? Deposits held by commercial banks with the central bank, which means 161. So you have to add up 329, 87 and 161, isn't it? What is the number you get if you add up all these three?
577 billion.
Exactly, 577 billion. Good. So reserve money is 577 billion. Correct. Broad money. How do you define broad money? When you calculate broad money, what is the easiest way to do that? What do you calculate first?
Narrow money.
Narrow money, exactly. First we calculate M1. So how do you define M1? What are the components we add to calculate M1?
Currency held by public.
Currency held by public, correct. Let's say CB.
Demand deposit held by the public with commercial bank.
Exactly. Demand deposits held by public with the commercial bank. So if you take currency held by public, that is 329. Demand deposits held by public with commercial banks, 283. So how much, the sum of these two is how much? M1.
612 billion.
612 billion, correct. Now we have M1. Out of M1, how do you get broad money? What is the next step? You add
Time and savings deposits held by public.
exactly time and savings deposits of the public with commercial banks. So if you add up the 612 and time and savings deposits held by the public with commercial banks, which means 2,848. Okay, so if you add up those two, how much you get as the broad money supply?
3,460.
Exactly, 3,460. Correct. Very good. I think you have taken the concept very clearly. And I told you this is referred to as M2 because here we only consider time and savings deposits held by public with commercial banks. Now in Sri Lanka, I told you other than M2, we have another variable called M2B. So to calculate M2B, we add up M2 and foreign currency deposits. Now in this table, do we have any information on foreign currency deposits? We don't have. So if you have foreign currency deposits given in this table, actually you have to calculate not M2, but you have to calculate M2B. Now in this case, we don't have foreign currency deposits. Otherwise, if it is given, you have to calculate M2B. I think we have another question. There you will see that difference. Okay. Now I'll clear these workings. And let's only keep the numbers that you have calculated. Okay. In 2014, reserve money we have as 577, M1 612, M2 3460. So these are the numbers for 2014. Okay. Let's go. Now, if you do this calculation in the exam correctly, you get 5 marks straight away, right? You don't need to give explanations or whatever. Just you do the calculation, you get 5 marks. Now, question 2. Calculate the money creation ability of the banking system. Has it increased or declined from 2010 to 2014? What could be the possible reasons for such change? What do you say? Money creation ability of the banking system. Calculate. The first thing we'll calculate. How do you calculate money creation ability? How do you measure it? Money creation ability. Does anyone want to try any answer? How do you calculate money creation ability?
Base money supply plus broad money supply.
Okay. Now, money creation ability means what? You're right. Okay. You can calculate the total money supply by adding those two. Maybe you have to make a small adjustment, but let's say what you said is the total money supply. What I'm asking, what do you mean by money creation ability? Coming back to your answer, money creation ability indicates if you inject 1 unit of base money, how much broad money would be created, isn't it? That is the money creation ability. How do you simply define? It happens through in the banking system, deposit taking and lending. Remember, we discussed that money creation process very briefly. So it happens through deposit taking and lending. Now, from base money to broad money, that process you call it money creation ability. How do you measure it? What is the way to measure this? Do we have any particular way?
Money.
Sorry.
Into base money.
Okay.
It is calculated by the money multiplier.
Exactly. That is the answer I expected. Money multiplier. So from base money to broad money, let's put BM, otherwise you will be confused. We calculate a particular variable called money multiplier. Money multiplier, how do you define? How do you calculate the money multiplier? Simply the ratio, isn't it? There are two ways of calculating money multiplier. One is 1 divided by the reserve ratio. Remember, we have done some examples, 1 divided by reserve ratio. The other way is what? What is the other way? How do you calculate money multiplier?
Broad reverse money.
Exactly. Broad money divided by monetary base. Someone said K into base money. Someone just said. Oh, you can say MM into base money. That is how do you get broad money, isn't it? That's also correct. But what we are trying to do is here is we are trying to identify the money multiplier. Now calculate the money creation ability of the banking system. So what is the money creation ability of the banking system in 2014? That is simply you calculate the money multiplier, isn't it? Have you done it? What is the money multiplier for 2014? How do you get it?
5.997.
5.997.
997.
Correct. So how do you get it? You divide 3460 by 577. So this is the multiplier for 2014. Now you get some marks, but to get full marks, you have to answer the question in full. What is the other part? Has it increased or decreased from 2010 to 2014? What do you say? Has it increased or decreased?
Increased.
Increased. How do you say?
By calculating 2010 K.
Yes, exactly. You have to calculate 2010 figures as well. So what are the figures for 2010? From your answer, what I understand, you have the numbers. So what is reserve money for 2010?
361.
361. Okay. What is the broad money for 2010?
1814.
1814. So this is total money supply divided by the reserve money. What you get is, what is the money multiplier? 5.025.
025.
Correct. So you can observe in 2010, money multiplier was just 5.025. And during this 4 years period, it has increased to 5.997. So almost 6. From 5 to 6, money multiplier has increased during this period. So I think you know the calculation. That's very clear. Last part, what could be the possible reasons for such a change? What could be the reason for money multiplier to increase? Any guess?
Less reserve ratio.
Okay, less reserve ratio. Do we have any evidence on that? We don't
Repo
have.
rate
But
declined by 75 points.
sorry.
Repo rate declined by 75 points.
Okay. Now both answers are correct. I think what you have mentioned, it could be possibly due to decline in the reserve ratio. We don't have information given here, but could be the possible reasons. No? So one reason could be SRR, reserve ratio is reduced. We know when reserve ratio is reduced, money multiplier increases. So that could be one reason. And somebody correctly pointed out again, the repo rate has gone down from 7.25 to 6.5. So the central bank reverse repo overnight repo rate means the policy rate of the central bank. We discussed policy rates last week, remember? Monetary policy rates. So if the monetary policy rate has gone down, that indicates the interest rates in the economy has gone down, allowing more lending. Remember we discussed last week, when you allow more lending, more loans, that is source of money. So how do you allow more loans? How more borrowings by the people? When interest rates go down, people start borrowing. So interest rates are reduced. That could be another reason. So both these suggest what? The central bank has relaxed monetary policy. From 2010 to 2014, monetary policy has been relaxed. Or it has given more flexibility to the economy. I think this next question also very much related to the same. That asks, or the question asks, has the monetary policy been relaxed or tightened in 2014 compared to 2010? What do you say? Monetary policy has been relaxed, isn't it? Because central bank overnight repo rate has come down from 7.25 to 6.5. So it's very clear, monetary policy has reduced, allowing more economic activities and space. Now, question is, what could be the reason for such change? What are the reasons why it has been reduced or relaxed? Can anyone suggest a possible reason for such monetary policy relaxation?
Decrease in repo rate.
Decreasing in?
Repo rates.
Correct. That is, the reflection, or that is the indicator for monetary relaxation. That's correct. Repo rate has been reduced. When you reduce the repo rate, that indicates monetary policy has reduced or relaxed. The question asks, why is that? What could be the reason?
Money deficit in the economy.
Money deficit in the economy. Do you have such information to say that here? We don't know whether money is not enough or not in the economy. That is really a difficult thing to say here. But at least we can say something by looking at the numbers. What is that?
Inflation has been reduced.
Exactly. Inflation rate has come down. See, inflation in 2010 is 6.2. In 2014, inflation has come down to 3.3. Remember, central bank is looking at the monetary policy or conducting monetary policy to bring down inflation, isn't it? So if the central bank doesn't have any inflation threat, it can relax the monetary policy. So here inflation rate, if you look at, has come down from 6.2 to 3.3. So that is another reason that the central bank, or that is the main reason that the central bank has allowed relax monetary policy. Okay. Last one. The question is, has the velocity of money increased or declined from 2010 to 2014? And why is that? What do you think? Velocity. What is velocity first? That is the speed of circulation of monetary unit. So when a particular monetary unit is injected to the economy, how much transactions created by the particular monetary unit. That is simply velocity. In our discussions, we term V as velocity as V. So how do you calculate velocity? That's the first thing we should know how to calculate. How do you define velocity? Does anyone remember? I think I have done a kind of an explanation based on central bank actual data during our session. Does anyone remember how to calculate velocity?
GDP divided by money supply.
Divided by money supply.
Okay, I hear a couple of answers. Both yes, correct. GDP divided by money supply, broad money. So I think if you divide this GDP at market price means that is based on current prices. So if you divide that GDP by your broad money amount that we have already calculated, as I remember for 2014, broad money is 3,460. So what is the value for velocity for this year?
2.82.
Yes. Now the question is, velocity has increased or decreased? Again, to do that, to identify that, you have to calculate velocity for both years for 2010 as well. So this is 2.83 for 2014. What is the velocity for 2010?
$3.08.
Exactly, 3.0809. Let's say 9. So what you can say, velocity has increased or decreased?
Decreased.
Velocity has decreased in 2014. Now, the possible reasons, what could be the reason for such change? Now, this is a kind of a difficult question to answer, but if you, I think, know the concept well, you can basically provide some answer. Now, how this velocity is measured, that is actually the speed of circulation in the monetary unit, or how much transactions are created by a particular monetary unit. So if that's the case, how do you identify the reason for a change in velocity. Then you have to look at the, variables affecting the velocity. So one such reason could be if you look at the upper side of the equation for GDP, you can say the GDP growth is not consistent with the monetary growth. Okay, so broad money growth and GDP growth, they are not moving in the same consistent rate. That is one possible reason. The other reason could be broad money. Now, broad money we use as the monetary aggregate here to calculate the transaction or the velocity. Now, if you see a change in velocity, that could be due to the nature of transactions in the economy. Sometimes people do transactions without using money, without using cash, without using deposits. People do some transactions. For example, modern payment techniques, sometimes electronic payments, internet-based payments. Those are the reasons for, or those are the methods that you can do transactions. So money velocity has come down mean here transactions done using money has come down. Broad money means currency and deposits. So money based transactions have come down. Maybe some non-cash payments have gone up. As I said, internet-based payments, other technology-based or electronic-based payments have gone up. That could be one reason. So if you look at the actual position in some countries, like advanced countries, we see their velocity levels have come down over time. That is because due to development in payment technologies. They are not using money for transactions. Mostly non-cash transactions are carried out in most of the advanced countries. So as a result, their velocity levels have come down. So that is the possible reason. I understand that is a bit of a difficult thing to answer, but I think if you get the concept very clear, you can basically provide an answer. Okay, right. And I remember I requested to you look at another question, that is 2019 March question, as I remember, last one. Were you able to answer this question? At least part of this? Or did you make any attempt to answer? Is it 2019 one or 17 one? I can't remember exactly, but I think it's 19, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
I'm just looking at my question paper. Okay. Right. Let's start. Again, we have monetary and economic data for 2 years, 2016-17, and we need to answer based on the numbers given. This is very straightforward, like in the previous case, but I'm selecting this question because this has some other definition of money. That's the reason. So calculate money for 2000, reserve money for 2016 and 17. What has happened to reserve money in 2016? What is the value? Reserve money for 2016-17. What is the value for reserve money in 2016? What are the components you add here?
855.
855 for 2016. How do you get it? You basically add currency held by public, currency with commercial banks, plus commercial bank deposits with the central bank. So all three equals to 855. Then 2017, this is 2016.
938 billion.
938 billion. If you add up these three components for 2017, you get 938 billion. Discuss the changes in reserve money during this period. What has happened to reserve money during this period? Is it gone up, gone down, or unchanged?
It's gone up.
So obviously gone up. By how much?
80 billion.
83 billion. So if you give these three answers, you get full marks. Now I haven't seen questions asking you to calculate the rate of growth, but you should know it, as I said, because there is a possibility that the examiner might ask, what is the rate of expansion of money during these 2 years? Now, what is the rate of expansion of reserve money during these 2 years? How do you calculate? Remember, I told you the method of calculating the growth rate. You take the current year, let's say P1, and the base year P0, the difference between two periods, as a percentage of the base period, multiplied by 100. So if you do this, you will get the rate of expansion in money. So in this case, how do you calculate it? 83, we have already done it, isn't it? We have taken the difference now, divided by 855. So what is the rate of expansion?
9.70.
9.70%. Great. So that part should also, you have to know that part as well, because there is a possibility that you have questions in that nature. Okay, part 1 is done. Part 2, narrow money supply for 2 years. What is the narrow money supply for 2016? M1. 776. What you do is you add up currency held by public and demand deposits held by public. 2017, how much?
792.
792. So what is the difference between 2 years? Money has increased by how much? M1. By about 16 billion. Similarly, you can calculate the growth rate as well. Okay, that is also a possibility. Part 3. Calculate the consolidated broad money. Now here the question is a bit different from what we had earlier. Earlier we calculated M2. Now we are supposed to calculate M2B. How do you calculate M2B? What is the different definition? So M2B we calculate for Sri Lanka. Can somebody remember or recall the way of calculating M2B? M2?
M2 plus
We calculate M2 by taking M1 plus time and savings deposits of the public, TSD. So if you take only these two, what you get is M2. If you add up these adjusted foreign currency deposits, FX, D, then all three equals to M2B. This is in Sri Lankan monetary aggregates, we have this special aggregate M2B, and this is considered as the most representative monetary aggregate in Sri Lanka. So what is M2B for 2016? How do you calculate? For 2016, how do you calculate? You get, sorry, currency in circulation, so currency held by public, demand deposits held by public with commercial banks, those two equals to M1. Then you add up time and savings deposits held by public with commercial banks. Then you add up adjusted foreign currency deposits. All together, how much?
5,404.
5,404. Correct. In 2017, what is the amount?
6,306.
Exactly, 6,306, which means M2B has increased by about 902 billion, yes, between the 2 years. Last one, velocity. I think it's very easy and straightforward to calculate velocity. How do you do? Now, depending on the monetary aggregates you have here, you can define monetary velocity in two ways. What are these two ways? I'm just telling you because you might be confused as to which monetary aggregate that we have to take. Now we have two types of monetary aggregates here. One, we have M2 and we have M2B as well, right? So velocity either you can define based on M2. How do you do? GDP divided by M2. Or you can define it by M2B, that is GDP divided by M2B. Both are correct. So if you go by M2, velocity for 2016 is 2.46. For 2017, 2.36. So in this case, velocity has declined during the 2 years. Similarly, you can also take M2B and calculate velocity, and probably if you do that, you will see it has come down during the 2 years. Okay, I think other questions what we have here is very similar to those two types of questions, and some of these other questions actually I covered in our session as well. For example, if you recall this decentralized cryptocurrency, digital fiat currency, we discuss in detail this entire question we discuss in the class. Okay, so with that I think we have some reasonable understanding how to calculate Monterey aggregates and what are the different definitions related to these aggregates. And I'm really happy and I really appreciate most of you have done a good job as we agreed last week, and I'm very happy about that. And let's continue that practice going forward. We'll answer in the try to answer in the class and discuss those answers. That will be helpful. Okay. Right. With that, let's move to the next part. Does anyone having any question? Let me switch on my lights. It's dark. Any questions, please? No? Okay. Let's move to the today's discussion. I hope you have the handout on interest rates. Can you see the slide?
Yes, sir.
And do you have these slides with you?
Yes, sir.
Yes. And I have already sent you a note on monetary policy, kind of a brief note other than the slides. That is also available in the LMS. Did you get that, or did you get a chance to look at?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So that is also some, additional discussion or some support note for you to study for the exam. Okay. Now today we are looking at the interest rates. Why interest rates are important? Now, from our previous week's discussion, we defined monetary policy as the process that you control the availability of money and cost of money in the economy. So the central bank controls availability of money, that is MS, money supply. And also central bank controls the cost of money, that is interest rates. Both are done in order to keep inflation low and steady. That is the reason. So monetary policy has two components, money and interest rate. Money we have already covered in a detailed manner. Interest rates also we have some understanding, but in this part we will look at different definitions and different approaches to understand the interest rate. Okay. So interest rate is defined as the price of money. Any financial asset has a price, and most financial assets, including money, is subject to the interest rate. We have seen that money as the financial asset is used for different purposes, for different needs in the economy. People borrow money for their needs and they make payments as deferred payments, which means they settle loans. When they do, they do it using money. And when they are using money, we typically observe the price is paid for the usage of money. So when you are using money, you are basically paying a price or a rent. It's basically a monetary value. Monetary value means you pay the rent in money terms. Oh, it is the opportunity cost of the money. If someone has used that money for something else, what could have been earned out of that? That is the opportunity cost. So when the person is giving away a certain amount of money for the purpose of use of that money, which means a supplier of money is giving to a borrower money, when that borrower is paying back the amount or the principal, he is basically paying a rent. That rent is referred to as the interest rate or price of money. I think it's very simple. Interest rates are very important in the economy because it is one of the key macro variables in deciding savings and investment. Now, people make investment decisions, saving decisions in the economy by looking at the cost of money. People will save when they get an attractive return that is dependent on the interest rate. People invest when they get money at lower cost. Again, interest rate matters. So in the economy, money is allocated or resources are allocated for various purposes based on the interest rate. When interest rates are high or low, people tend to make their decisions. When interest rates are very high, some people they may not invest. When rates are high, some people might save. So these macro variables are affected by the interest rates. Then again, it affects consumer spending. When people observe low interest rates, they would like spending more. When people observe high interest rates, they would like postponing the consumption and investing or saving. So in that case also, interest rate is very important. Interest rate is very important for the central bank as well. I already mentioned to you, central bank is conducting monetary policy. Monetary policy in modern times implemented mainly through interest rates. Remember last week in our discussion, I told you central banks are having various tools, monetary policy tools. Among these tools, interest rate is the most popular, most effective, widely used measure. So central banks have very few weapons with them. So interest rate is one of the main weapons for the central bank. So monetary policy is basically implemented using the interest rate. So it is important for the central bank. Interest rate is important for the government. Why is that? Governments, they have, at least for two reasons. One, the governments are serving for people. So their vote base is dependent on people's desires and how do you fulfill people's needs. So if you see interest rates are really high and people's decisions and welfare is affected, the government has to be concerned about the interest rate. That is very important. Not only that, governments are borrowing. In most of the economies, the largest borrower of the economy is the government. Why they borrow? They in order to fulfill their budgetary needs, because governments are generating income, revenue, and also expenditure they have to incur. Usually there is a huge gap between this income and expenditure. Usually expenditure is much higher than income or revenue. So the balance or the remaining part is basically financed by the government through borrowings. So in government borrowing plan or government borrowing, among government borrowings, interest rate is playing a huge role because they have to pay interest for their borrowings as the government. So it's a very important variable for the government. When they monitor, they want to have interest rates to be low. So there is another reason why we need to look at interest rates. Finally, interest rates are affecting financial markets and prices as a whole. So any market segment is affected by the interest rate. Now, if you look at the stock market is affected by interest rate. When interest rates are going up, the stock markets might be affected. When interest rates are going up, when the bond markets could be affected. When interest rates are changing, even the foreign exchange market could be affected. For example, the foreign exchange rate, the current rate and the future rate is linked by the interest rate. So any change in interest rate is reflecting or affecting the exchange rate as well. So all in all, interest rate has very important role to play in the economy in terms of individual decisions, micro decisions, as well as overall decisions, which are the macro decisions. How interest rates are determined, or the theory of interest rate. There are various theories to explain the interest rate and how it is determined. Most of these theories are actually traditional theories. One such argument says the supply and demand for bonds will determine the interest rate. Bond means treasury bills or whatever, the government bonds, kind of a financial instrument. So interest rate will change when there is a change in demand for bonds or supply for bonds. So demand for bonds could change due to various factors like income, returns, risk factors, liquidity. All these could affect the demand aspect or demand side of the bond market. Similarly, in the supply side of the bond market or supply for bonds, changes in investment opportunities, government activities, these could have an impact on the supply side. So how the interest rate is determined? Demand for bonds, supply for bonds will simply determine the interest rate I. Okay. So that is one way of looking at the interest rate determination. Actually, that discussion is basically coming or is relevant to Irving Fisher's analysis. The Fisher was basically talking about this demand for bonds and supply for bonds. He called it as actually as the loanable market. So that is loanable market approach. Then later on we have seen interest rate is determined basically by the supply and demand for money. So that is actually Keynesian approach. So demand for money, we have seen demand for money is changing due to income or price level. Remember, we discussed this thing. Supply of money is determined by the monetary policy. Usually what we can observe in this case, money supply is basically constant because it is decided or defined by the central bank. Demand for money is like a negatively sloping curve which is affected by various factors like income, price level, preferences and all. So the equilibrium is determined, there is the interest rate. So from both analyses you would have seen supply and demand for funds or money or loanable funds will determine the interest rate. Okay. So that is very simply about the theoretical background. And there are various interest rates operating in the financial system. We can identify these different interest rates used for different purposes. So in the next couple of slides, we will basically look at what are these different components of or different definition concepts of interest rates. To start with, simple interest rate. That is actually the nominal quoted interest rate. The nominal quoted interest rate. It is expressed as a percentage. For example, let's say a particular FD is given 10% per annum. It is expressed as a percent for the annum, for the year. So 10% annum means quoted nominal interest rate. Simple, very simple to calculate. If you want to calculate interest rate for a particular amount, you simply multiply the lump sum of that amount or the principal by the interest rate, then you can calculate the interest component. I think I have definitions going forward. Compounded interest rate means we call it as an effective rate where interest on interest. I'll come back to that point. Nominal interest rate, which means simply interest rate including the impact of inflation, which means non-adjusted for inflation. Real interest rates, when you calculate real interest rate or when you operate with real interest rates, there's no inflationary impact. So real interest rate has excluded the impact of inflation. So price increases have been excluded in the real interest rate. So I have simple definitions for each and every type of interest rate. As I said, simple interest rate is the interest calculated on the principal value of a loan, or could be a deposit, whatever. It's based on the principal value. No compounding is there, which means there's no interest on interest without any compounding. So as a result, a depositor will only gain interest on the principal. The borrower will never have to pay interest on interest. Which means he doesn't have to pay interest on in terms of accruals. You don't have to accrue any interest. It's easy to calculate, to understand. It's easy. It's basically used to calculate in simple financial contracts, especially in the banks. The simple interest rate can be applied for certain products. Normally they have compounded rates, but Even for a simple product, they can apply this simple interest rate. So as I said, how do you calculate? You take the interest rate out of as a percentage of the principal balance. So if you have to pay 1,000, interest rate is, let's say, 8%. It's a matter of taking 8% of this uh, principal value as the simple interest. Compounded interest rate is simply method of calculating interest where interest earned over time is added to the principal. Now, in this case, you are accumulating the interest over the period and adding that interest to the principal amount. Why this compounding is important? That is basically to give some incentive to provide loans for the borrowers, and they can earn out of that loans because the interest on interest is charged. And on the other hand, you encourage depositors to retain their money in the banks. When you have the compounded interest rates on deposits, people would like to keep their money in the banks because you earn interest on interest for that deposit. So the total accumulated value, including the principal, sum, and compounded interest, can be calculated by this formula. So P prime is simply the new principal sum. P means basically the original principal sum. How do you get it? From original to the new principal, you take this compounding part, 1 plus R divided by N into T. R means simply the nominal interest rate. N means number of compounding frequency. So if you have, let's say, 3 months or quarterly, that is basically 4. If it is monthly, your compounding frequency is 12. If it is daily, it's 365. Likewise, compounding. T is basically the time period. Overall length of the interest is equal. Okay. So here we have a simple example to understand these two. Let's say you have an investment 10,000, right? And you are having two options. One is having a simple interest rate. So what you get is every year out of the interest rate is 10%. Every year out of 10,000, you get 1,000 as your interest earnings. Okay. Some people actually they do this. They are basically depositing a certain amount of money. They withdraw the interest component. So every year what you have is simply 10,000. So up to 10-year period. So the total interest earned in this case, let's say a 10-year period, equals to 10,000. Compounding means you are not taking back the interest and you are adding it to the principal. Right? So the first year, what you have received as your interest is 1,000 because it is 10%. Next year, you get interest on this 1,000 as well as 10,000. So interest will be calculated on 11,000. So that's why you have 1,100 here. In the following year, you have to add up that one as well to your capital. So this one plus this one. So your interest would be, capital would be 12,100. So you get interest based on this. So likewise, every period you have interest component is added to the principal. So altogether you get 15,937 out of 10-year period. Over the 10-year period, So you will see when you compound, your return is greater. Similarly, when you compound, you pay high. It is a loan. So as I said, the banks are financial institutions are applying compounding to encourage their lenders and also to encourage their depositors to keep money in the banks. This compounding leads to understand another important concept in finance, effective rate. Specifically, effective annual interest rate, EAR. EAR. I'm just telling you this because these are used in financial contracts. So what do you mean by effective annual rate? Interest rate that is actually earned, or if it is a loan, paid on an investment or a loan due to compounding over a time period. So the concept of compounding is applied here in order to calculate the total earnings for a particular period. So you call it annual equivalent rate, EAR. So how do you calculate it? This is the simple formula to calculate EAR. 1 plus I divided by n power n minus 1. So here I means the nominal interest rate, n means number of periods. If you are compounding for 60 period, n should be 60. So, sorry, if you are compounding for a monthly period, n should be 12. If you are compounding for a semi-annual period, 6 months, n should be 2. If you are compounding for 4 months period, 3 months quarterly period, your n should be 4. Likewise. So here we have an example, very simple example that you can understand EAR concept. If investment A pays you 10% compounded monthly, and investment B is paying you 10.1 compounded semi-annually, which means 2 times per year, how do you decide which investment is paying more? To do that, to understand that, you have to calculate EAR, effective annual interest rate or annual equivalent rate. So for investment A, if you apply this formula, 1 plus 10%, 10% is the nominal rate, divided by 12. 12 is the monthly compounding. Power into 12 minus 1. If you solve it, you get 10.47. Similarly, for investment B, it says the rate is 10.1, but only annual compounding 2 times, which means half a year. So again, divided by 2 to indicate time period, power into 2 minus 1. If you solve it, you get 10.36. So the message here is, as long as you compound more, your return is higher. So from this equation, or from this calculation, we can see investment A is subject to greater compounding, 12. Investment B is subject to lesser compounding, it's only 2. So A is having a higher return because of the high compounding. Then that is a simple and compounded rates. Then we look at nominal and real interest rates. Nominal rates, very simply, as I said earlier also in the case of simple interest rates, what you nominally quote, what is stated. If you go to a bank will quote you a nominal interest rate. Sometimes mainly we use I to denote nominal interest rate. Real interest rate is interest rate adjusted for inflation. Because sometimes even though you get I nominal interest rates a particular percentage, this could be affected by the inflation rate, and as a result your purchasing power of money is affected. To understand the purchasing power of money, we have to look at the real aspect. So real interest rate is used to understand the inflation adjusted, or in other words, the purchasing power of the money. So how do you define the relationship between these two rates? For that matter, we use this Fisher equation. You call it Fisher equation. So in this Fisher equation, R means the real rate. Okay. IT means nominal interest rate. So both are in time t, current rate time. Real interest rate in time t, nominal interest rate in time t. This part actually E means expectations. This phi means inflation. So broadly we can call it as expected inflation. So if you deduct inflation from the nominal rate, you calculate the real rate. So here I have further simplified it. R means I minus inflation. Okay. OI means R plus inflation. Nominal rate means real rate plus inflation. So in either case, what we are doing is simply we are adjusting for inflation. Okay. Now here I have an example. A bank pays an interest rate of 15% per annum on an FD. Question asks, what is the amount of interest if you deposit 100,000? Second question, if your inflation is 10% during the year, what is the real interest rate? Third question, what is the additional amount of money you get in real terms? Three parts. You deposit 100,000 at 15%. What is your amount of interest, monetary interest? And if inflation is 10%, what is your real rate? And what do you earn in terms of real or additional return if you adjust for inflation? Can we do a quick calculation?
15,000.
Okay, it's very clear. The interest amount is simply 100,000 into 15%. That is simple interest rate, isn't it? We know it.
5%.
15,000. Okay. If inflation is 10% during the year, what is the real rate?
5%.
5%, exactly. Simply 15% minus 10%. So your real return is 5%. What is the additional amount you get in real terms? How much? 5,000. Exactly, 5,000. How do you calculate? Simply 100,000 into 5, which means 5,000. Or you can take this 15,000 minus the impact of inflation is 10,000, isn't it? 100,000 into 10% means 10,000. So again, the balance is 5,000. It's very simple. The relationship between nominal and real interest rate is theoretically explained by this Fisher effect, as I already highlighted here in this uh, equation. So this equation we call it as the Fisher effect. So inflation is a function of real rate and the inflation rate. The Fisher effect suggests there is a one-for-one relationship between the inflation rate and the nominal rate. What does that mean? If this inflation goes by 10%, increase by 10%, this suggests interest rate should also go up by 10%. So there is a clear relationship between the interest rate and the inflation rate. So what is termed as the Fisher effect. Okay. Now the next part, we know there are various interest rates in the economy, not only one or two rates in the economy. There are thousands of rates uh, in the economy. Most of these rates are used for price financial products, trade financial instruments, etc. etc. Now, if you look at these thousands of interest rates, you will observe they are not similar. They are different. One interest is different to the other rate. If you have 100 interest rates in the economy, both are, all these 100 rates are not equal to one rate. For example, they all are not 5%. They could be 6%, 7%, 4%, 9%. Likewise, there are various interest rates operating in the economy. Now, we can ask question, why there are different interest rates in the economy? So, answer can be given by focusing two aspects. Interest rates differ in the economy due to two major reasons. One, the risk. Second one, term to maturity. So this is simply the maturity. So risk and the term to maturity are the main reasons to have different interest rates in the economy. Some rates are affected by the risk. Some rates are affected by the term or the time period. So the impact of the risk is theoretically explained by the risk structure of interest rates. Impact of the maturity, or which means the duration, is explained by the term structure of the interest rate. So let's look at each of these in a little detail manner. So risk structure suggests financial instruments with same maturity can have different interest rates depending on the differences in their risk. Financial instruments in the same category, same bucket, with same maturity can have different interest rates due to risk. For example, if you take the bonds, this universe is bonds, right? And let's say all these bonds are having 10-year maturity. All bonds are 10-year maturity. But if you take their interest rates, these interest rates are different. They are not equal. Why these differences are there? We consider or we observe these different interest rates are there because of the differences in the risk. Risk levels are different from one to other. So how can we observe these differences in risks? There could be various reasons. Now, in finance theory, at least 3 reasons are identified to have different risk levels. Among them, the most important reason is the default risk. Default means the possibility that the borrower will not pay. So this default is the major cause of differences in interest rates. Very simply, if a particular investment is highly exposed to default risk, which means the borrower doesn't pay, then you charge a high interest rate. If you see a lower possibility of default, you charge a lower interest rate. Imagine a borrower in a bank. If you observe a borrower who has no good record of paying, or he has certain bad records of defaulting loans, as a bank you charge high interest from him because he's a risky customer. And if you have a good customer who's basically paying loans on time, no defaults, basically borrowing in large scale, a prime customer, you will basically have low interest rate on him, on his facility. So likewise, default is one of the key factors determining the different levels of interest rates in the economy. Other factor, liquidity consideration. Liquidity means some of the instruments are very liquid. You can trade them very easily. So for those instruments, you have lower interest rates. Some instruments, they are not highly liquid, which means you can't sell it, as you want. There's no demand. For them, you have low interest rates, high interest rates. Third reason, tax consideration. Some, markets are subject to taxes. Some markets are not subject to taxes. For example, in Sri Lanka, some government securities market, they are subject to tax, withholding tax. Coal money transactions, subject to some taxes. I think that tax was removed now. So those tax considerations are also leading to differences in interest rates. So in this chart, we have an example. So this is annual yield rates, interest rates for different bonds in USA. So what are the different bonds we have? If you look at these lines, we have government bonds, long term. We have state bonds. We have corporate. BAA means this is rating. Again, this is corporate. AAA means this is rating. Now, if you look at these different bonds, they are having same maturity. Let's say 10-year maturity. If you look at the evolution of their rates, you will see the government bond rates have the lowest interest rate. This is the lowest line. Corporate BAA is the highest line, right? This one, BAA line, this one, bonds, government bonds. So what is the observation? Government bonds are having the lowest interest. Corporate bonds with BAA is having the highest interest. What is the implication? What is the message there? Bonds, government bonds are generally having a low possibility of defaulting. Usually governments, they don't default, they pay. Whenever they are in a position to pay, they pay. Government can print money and pay debt. It's possible. So governments usually do not default, and as a result, they have low interest rates. Corporates, you don't know. AAA corporate is good or better than the BBB corporate. So in that sense, AAA company has low interest rates compared to triple B company. So here what we have taken is triple B company. They are paying high interest rates. Why? They are having high risk. So that reflects the risk level is an important consideration to have different interest rates. Then we have term structure. I told you term means basically the time period. Now here, how we define bonds with identical risk, liquidity tax may have different interest rates. Now here we have seen in the risk case, risk is coming due to various reasons: default risk, liquidity considerations, taxes. Now let's assume all these are I'm sorry, all these are similar, same, no change, but still there could be different interest rates. That is mainly because the time remaining to maturity. An instrument with 1 year, 2 year, up to 30 year would have different rates. Instruments with 3 months and 30 year have different rates. This is mainly due to term differences. Now in this chart we have three type of instruments. We have 20-year bond, 3 to 5 year bond, and 3-month bill. If you look at the lines, 3-month bill has the lowest line. This is 3-month bill. 20-year bond has the highest line, which means for 20 years interest rate is higher because risk is higher. For 3 months interest is lower, which means the risk is lower. So I hope that gives a clear understanding. As long as you have higher maturity period, the interest you have to pay on the instrument will be higher. So I think with that we are very clear why there are different interest rates in the economy. Various interest rates are there. Different levels are there. So these levels are coming from differences either in the risk level or in the maturity period. Now, when you talk about maturity period, the term structure, there's an important consideration in finance or important tool that we identify in finance. We have to have some understanding. That is yield curve. I think you may have heard this word yield curve. Yield curve is simply a plot showing the relationship between two things. What is this relationship? One, if you look at this chart, on this axis you see the term, which means the maturity period. This axis you see the interest rate or the return, or you can call it yield. So the relationship between the yield and the term is plotted in this chart, which we call it as the yield curve. Now yield curve is an important tool to understand the market. Now typically yield curve should be upward sloping. Why? Typically short-term rates are low, long-term rates are high. From the term structure, from this slide we have noticed, in the longer horizon you have to pay high because you are bearing high risk uncertainty. Now in this case 30 year. So in the 30-year period you have high risk. So when you plot this 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, etc., etc., against their interest rate, you will see normally as long as you increase the term, your interest rate could go up. Such yield curve, you call it an upward sloping yield curve. This is the normal situation. In an economy, what you observe is an upward sloping yield curve. Normally you observe this. Short-term rates are low, long-term rates are high. Some people say this normal yield curve, what we have as the chart here, is a reflection of normal economic performance in an economy. So if the economy is moving in the right direction, this should be the way. In the short run, you have low interest rates. In the long run, you have high interest rates because people think in the long run, interest rates are high because of inflationary impact. There could be some other situations, the yield curve is becoming flatter like this. You can't say anything whether short term, long term rates are. There could be some other situations, especially during crisis time, pandemic times, extraordinary time. Yield curve will be like this. Short term rates are high, but long term rates are low. So you call it an inverted yield curve. Typically, what we are interested in upward sloping yield curve, which can be observed in the economy in usual times. One more thing, if you look at the yield curve, you will see there are various time periods, June, September, likewise. So each line indicates the relationship between interest rate and the term at each period. If you look at all these different lines, you will see over the period, the yield curve has shifted upwards. Oh, shifted downwards. So that indicates the movements of interest rates over particular period of time. Okay. Then one more thing I need to highlight before we move to the Sri Lankan context. Interest rate, as I have mentioned, the opportunity cost of money. That is basically cost of money. It is different from return. Return indicates how well a person would be financially doing when he holds a financial asset for a particular period of time. So you call it a rate of return. So this return is basically subject to changes in the prices over time. For example, if you buy a security today, treasury bill, how much it will value in 1 month's time. If you take the difference, that will give you an idea of the return. That is not the interest. So that is coming from basically changes in value of the price, and if you calculate that price as a share of the purchase price, you get the return. For example, let's say you call interest rate as 10%, which means you have to pay 10% out of your principal. Return 10% means is simply the difference between prices. Could be 10%, which means your gain, right? So usually these high returns are associated with high risk that we already know. We know, I think, in general common sense. So what I want to highlight, there is a difference between the interest rate and return. Then let's come back to, or let's come to the Sri Lankan context very quickly. In Sri Lanka, we observe various interest rates, as we have mentioned in the previous slides. In an economy, there are various interest rates depending on the risk and the term structure. In the case of Sri Lanka also, we observe there are various interest rates. Now, central bank decides the benchmark rate of the economy. If you take the interest rates as a complete line, right? This is the central bank. This is people, right? So from central bank rates to people, there's a long way to go. So you start with central bank policy rates. What people observe is market rates. So these market rates will not change or will not have any impact unless the central bank changes these policy rates. So this goes through various channels in between. You have various people, institutions, and all that. But still, whatever the change you introduce to the policy rates is felt by this entire market and the people. That's why you call it as the benchmark interest rates, the policy interest rates. So this is decided by the central bank. What should be the rate? Benchmark rate is decided by the central bank. Central bank compiles other rates for the industry. So it compiles the interbank rate, treasury bill rates, lending rates, deposit rates, other rates. There are various interest rates compiled by the central bank for the information of the market, right? So through market actions, these rates are, decided. Central bank is doing what is basically it's providing information to the market on these different interest rates. So the benchmark, as I said very clear, is the policy interest rates. Now, I want to make a stop here because I have a kind of a assignment for you before we discuss this part. Now we can't ignore this part as well because in the exam we have questions related to these interest rates, their levels, their definitions, how they work, and what is the importance likewise. Okay. Now my assignment for you basically just look at the central bank annual report, chapter 7. Okay. So this chapter 7 is on money and interest rates. So when you go through this chapter, you will observe answers for these different interest rates. So I want you to find out definitions, so some kind of an idea about these rates. What is SDFR? Standing Deposit Facility Rate. What is SLFR? Standing Lending Facility Rate. Actually, I discussed these two last week when we talk about monetary policy. Then what is bank rate? What is AWCMR, or we call it average weighted cold money rate? And here treasury bill, treasury bond rates, I'll discuss that next week. And this slide. So I want you to find out answers for this slide. Benchmark rates. And this slide, market rates. So I want answers or definitions for these different interest rates. What is AWPR, AWLR, NLR, DR, FDR, NDR. So these rates, there are various definitions given in the central bank annual report. So this chart you can find in the annual report. So this is a kind of an exercise for you to remember it very clearly, because these rates are important generally, not only in the exam, but in your day-to-day life also. Some of these rates are really important if you are a really member of the financial sector, and when you are basically acting in the financial market, those are needed. So if you go to the questions, you will see what I meant was, or what I asked you to do is very relevant, because there are various questions related to these rates. For example, SDFR, AWPLR, right? SDFR here, and these are also same questions in different ways, right? AWPLR likewise. So my request for you, would you be able to find out some answers for this requirement, right? So I'm having a question here. Please explain the relationship with interest rates and what do you mean by the Keynesian analysis? What is that? Keynesian. Okay, I'm sorry. Keynesian analysis. So Keynesian analysis, I think I mentioned to you. If I go back to the slide, here I told you. Now, in the case of Keynesian analysis, we take interest rate as demand and supply for money. So money supply in the economy, it's like this, MS. I think I didn't draw this chart. Maybe that was the confusion. So money supply is constant in the economy based on the Keynesian analysis because money supply is injected by the central bank. So it's not responsive to the interest rate. But demand for money, remember we discussed different motives, transaction motive, precautionary motive, speculative motive, and we have seen the money demand curve is downward sloping based on the income levels, price levels, etc., etc. So this is money demand. So demand and supply for money will determine the interest rate in the Keynesian analysis. If money demand increases, interest rate changes. If money supply was increased by the central bank, interest rate changes. So this is simply the Keynesian way. In the previous case, for the Fisher analysis, it's like this, very simply, an asset market approach. Supply for assets, demand for assets. So you will see this curve is different compared to Keynesian analysis. Okay. I didn't go into that detail because in our exam we don't need such a thorough or comprehensive discussion on the theory of interest rate. Okay, clear? Now we agree on our assignment, everyone. What we will do next week, we will start with the discussion on definitions of various interest rates. Okay, then we'll move to the next session. Right, I'll stop at this point and I'll see you next week at the same time. Have a good weekend and stay safe. Thank you.